Okay, good evening, everybody. Everybody who is listening to us this evening all over the world. Cian O'Neill is my name. Talking to you all out of Cork Institute of Technology in Ireland, the southern coast of Ireland. On behalf of Metrifit, I'm joined this evening by CEO of Health and Sport Technologies, Peter Larkin, and CTO, Anne Brune. But more importantly, I actually have the pleasure to invite you all to spend some time with Kevin Schultz. Kevin is the Director of Olympic Strength and Conditioning at the University of Wisconsin. So I'm really looking forward to spending the next 30 minutes or so with Kevin and effectively talking about his role, number one, in UW, and also how he incorporates the Metrifit athlete monitoring platform with his athletes. So Kevin, I would love to say good evening, because that's what time it is here in Ireland, but it's actually lunchtime over there, 12:30 Central Time, I believe.
Absolutely. It's a lunch break for this guy, so this worked out perfectly. Thank you.
No problem at all. To anybody listening on the West Coast, of course, it's good morning, probably around 10:30. But Kevin is on his lunch break, and I'm sorry that it's a working lunch for you today, Kevin, but we have a lot of people who are very interested to listen to your story, number one, and then also how you incorporate this aspect of technology and making sure you can optimize performance with your athletes. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, yeah, you know, that could take a long time, maybe 30 minutes. I've only been in the profession now for about 10 years, going on 10 years now, but it feels like it's been a lot longer for all the right reasons. I started out at the university, going to school, playing American football, getting a degree in exercise, sports science teaching. So when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a physical educator. And I got through that program, had a really good experience, went back, got a master's degree in exercise science, strength and conditioning from the University of Wisconsin, lacrosse as well. Had a great opportunity there to be a graduate assistant within the strength and conditioning realm, and then also got brought on as an assistant track and field coach. You know, I think one of the biggest things that really separates me from a lot of my peers is that I spent a substantial portion of my career coaching. So I spent 4 years as a collegiate track and field coach. I spent 5 years as a collegiate American football coach, on top of always being a strength coach. So, you know, I've gone from a place where I was coaching football, coaching track and field. I had 17 sports all by myself. I was teaching 2 classes a semester, to a point now where I'm at the University of Wisconsin, where I have 3 teams I work with, 75 athletes, and life is just blissful here. So that's kind of the gist of my story. I've been really blessed to be around a lot of amazing people that have really empowered me to do a great job and to educate myself and further my experiences. And, you know, sometimes things just work out really well and you find yourself in a position where you feel like you could stay forever.
Wow, that sounds pretty boring, your life today, Kevin.
Oh, it's crazy, man. You know, I find myself on my deck a lot reading books and cooking out barbecue style. So it's I'm so lucky to be here, and, you know, I got a lot of people to thank.
No, you know, I really appreciate your journey. Interestingly, we're like kindred souls. My own background was initially at 3rd level in university. I trained to be a physical education teacher, just like you. And then more of my interest was actually in the area of applied sports science. I spent the next number of years working on my PhD in that field, and like yourself, was always interested in coaching, not just the application of sports science and strength conditioning, but actually the science of coaching. I got injured quite young myself in my career and started coaching at a young age, which seems to be very similar to yourself.
Yep.
I'm fascinated by that journey, and I think what it does do for this conversation is it gives the audience an interesting insight into someone who is looking at it from both perspectives. That is, not just from the sports science, the physical training, the athletic performance perspective, but also from the actual coaching side of things and the technical, tactical performance. Surely you see that as a huge advantage to your career, and that's probably the trajectory of your career is based on that today.
Oh, hands down. You know, I'm just very lucky to be able to walk into a conversation with sport coaches, with sports medicine professionals, with my colleagues within strength and conditioning, and be able to have a conversation about a lot of different things. You know, the lens I look through is very broad. And I get a chance to really, you know, have in-depth conversations about technical tactical periodization with some of our sports, and really help them kind of design and develop in-season practices and best practices. And, you know, it's beautiful to be able to see what they're doing from a coaching standpoint on the pitch or on the court with volleyball, and then really be able to reinforce what we're doing from a physical preparation standpoint in the weight room or from a conditioning aspect. And, you know, it's been awesome as I've progressed here at Wisconsin to really kind of get my hands into things. Initially, when I was going through my educational process, I always wanted to be a coach. And, you know, for a lot of different reasons, strength and conditioning just kind of seemed to work out really well for me. But as I went through those preliminary years of being a sport coach and a strength coach, it was awesome to be able to have, you know, complete control over every aspect of the student athlete's physical, technical, tactical, mental, and nutritional preparation. And, you know, I was very lucky when I was working at smaller universities to really be that primary person doing all the coaching, the S&C work, the nutrition. You know, I went back to school. I got my massage therapy license so I could do soft tissue work, and it was awesome. But then to get to a place like Wisconsin where I have all these brilliant minds around me that can really do a much better job than I could, stretched thin, it's been awesome. You know, you get to walk the walk and talk the talk, but at the end of the day, you just empower the people around you to do their jobs and you do yours, and really great success comes from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And listen, I mean, to get a little bit more focus on our discussion today, we're here to talk about the athlete monitoring platform Metrifit and how it can be incorporated into, be it individual, team sports, at amateur level, collegiate level, professional level. I myself have been using it for several years now, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic platform there from an athlete monitoring perspective. I tell you, I'm not sure how much you're aware of the sports scene in Ireland, but our national games are called Gaelic football and hurling, and effectively they're amateur sports, but really focusing on a very professional ethos, whereby our guys at the elite level, they train like pros, but they still go to work every day. They have family, they have all the different challenges of mortgages and everything. So for me in that position as the head coach and team manager at the moment, I really wouldn't be able to spend the time and the quality of time and be able to analyze the minutiae of performance and subjective player data without a platform like this. Tell us a little bit about how you use that platform, just on a generic level, and we'll delve deeper into some of the key components of that platform thereafter, Kevin.
Yeah, Cian, you are spot on with the, you know, just the demands that our student athletes, and in your regards, your professional athletes go through. There are a lot of different stressors that they encounter on a daily basis, a majority of them which are away from their sport development. So in order to really kind of understand what they're going through from a daily perspective, having Metrifit as a platform to really kind of dive deep into what their life experiences are looking like has really shaped the way that we can kind of provide better context to the sport coaches and as us as strength coaches to internalize what that information is telling us to make, you know, more meaningful conversations and interventions with our student athletes. And kind of regards to how we utilize it here with my sports, it really kind of depends. So each sport utilizes the technology slightly different. Our volleyball program, our volleyball staff really highly believes in what the data is telling us, and they have a really fine-tuned idea as far as what is coming their way from that information. Where our soccer programs, they've been somewhat, I don't want to say hit or miss, but it's taken some time to get their student athletes really invested into the technology. And as with anything, compliancy really is the key to success. And, you know, I think that's kind of one of the conversation pieces is compliancy with the technology. And really, I think as a good practitioner, and I'm sure you experience this at times, everything has to be purposeful. And so, you know, at different times throughout the annual season, we'll really hammer in the Metrifit to be able to make decisions with. And then other times, you know, we'll take it away and we'll say, don't worry about it. So it's really about giving the athletes perspective as far as when it's important to do it and when we don't necessarily need that data, because ultimately it takes, you know, maybe 15 seconds to fill in and log a training session or to do their mind and body session in the morning. But it is still a distraction to some of their other things in their life. So it's important for us as practitioners to really prioritize it at certain times, and then also put it on the shelves when we really don't feel that data or that information is going to be purposeful for us.
Sure, sure. And, you know, we'll come back to that later on, because there are some interesting, you know, ideas and notions that coaches have out there in order to increase and improve compliance. But just before we get that far, in terms of the use of subjective questionnaires, be it in the form of a fantastic platform like Metrifit, or back in the day, you know, some people just used to use pen and paper and Q&A. You know, where's the value that you place on subjective questionnaires, especially a coach like yourself who has responsibility for quite a lot of athletes on any given day across multiple sports, but not only that, who are trying to, you know, be the best they can be in an academic sense as well as in a sporting sense?
Yeah, it's huge. You know, I've been using some form of a subjective wellness questionnaire for quite some time now, even at my earlier days at Wisconsin Lacrosse and at Carnegie Mellon University. It just provides great context as far as how you can make simple decisions. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of things that play into factor as far as why certain athletes, you know, respond to training sessions or adapt to different training sessions, and why there may be maladaptation or a lack of performance. And a lot of times it really does go down to these, you know, wellness questions and lifestyle interventions that could be made to improve those things. So, I really do, you know, we've done things with, you know, GPS technology, with heart rate data, and a lot of the times, you know, the things that we're seeing from a wellness questionnaire standpoint really tell us the same information, like we're getting high training loads or low training loads. You can look back at the subjective information that's providing, and you can understand why one day was good and another day wasn't as good.
Sure. And I mean, some of the variables that are used out there, they wouldn't surprise anyone in terms of muscle readiness, energy levels, sleep duration, sleep quality. There's two particular variables that I'm very interested in at the moment, and there's a lot of good research out there being conducted, and that's in the area of stress and mood state. Two variables that a lot of people probably wouldn't think of when they think of athletic performance. They're thinking more about the training, the health status, as I said, you know, the reaction to training and the body response. Are they two particular variables that you look at with great interest, just as I do, or what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think mood is going to be one of your biggest indicators of how successful practices or competitions are going to be. It's really interesting that we're having this conversation, because before we got on the phone here, I sat down and I looked at the Metrifit data for my volleyball team, and I looked at one of our individuals, and she had the lowest, you know, RTT, RTP number she's had all semester. And so I sent her a message. I go, hey, is everything okay? She goes, yeah, things are okay. And her mood state was really low, and her sleep quality was really, really low. I go, well, what's going on? And she's like, well, you know, I'm dog sitting for the assistant coach, and the dog kept me up all day. I'm like, well, geez, you know, for that to have such a big impact on her mood and her quality of sleep, it's definitely going to tell me something about how I should be perceiving practice and training session for tomorrow, more specifically. But it really does give you great insight to the challenges that the students are going through. And if kids come in, or if athletes come in with great moods, you know you can train them one way. If they come in and for whatever reason their mood state is suppressed and their energy levels are low and they're just not ready to train, well, obviously that puts you on a different path as far as what they need. You know, I think one of the most unique things about being in the States is, comparatively to what you would see overseas, is a lot of things are very cultural based. And so, you know, I think that's one thing why a lot of individuals come over to the States, is just because the culture within strength conditioning and S&C in the States is a lot different than what it may be overseas, where the culture really dictates the training. And so, you know, I think there's different times throughout the year where, you know, we just have to be the hammer, and we may have really poor numbers from a RTT or subjective wellness standpoint, but we just got to train. And, you know, a lot of times that culture is really dictated by the sport culture and the coaches within that sport. And so, you know, we jump to conclusions. Never. We always make an assessment based off of what the data is telling us. But there's times where you roll in and you're like, hey, you know what? They just got a squat today. I don't care that she had like 2 hours of sleep and a shitty sleep quality, pardon my language, but we just got to train. We got to get after it today. And there's no competitions lost today. There's only, you know, competitions that we can win in the weight room. So, you know, I think that's one of the very unique things about being in the States, is everything, especially from the team standpoint, is very cultural based.
Sure, but I got two comments on that. First of all, isn't that where the coach experience and even their intuition really has to step into play there, something that they've built up and developed over many, many years, such as yourself. And then the other thing there I would say on that is that one of the most important traits I find with athletes at the moment is this whole notion of resilience. Yeah. And developing robust athletes. that can cope with whatever the strains and the demands are, particularly in competition when things aren't going well. It's very easy to play well when everyone is playing well and the team is going well. But it's to develop that resilience and that robust nature of your athletes to really dig deep when it's called upon most. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when we're working with our teams here, that's probably at the forefront of the majority of the decisions that we make from a strength and conditioning standpoint is how can we develop, you know, gritty athletes, mentally tough athletes, resilient athletes that can handle the training. I'm not sure how it is overseas, but my athletes can train, you know, 20 hours a week with me from an S&C standpoint. But as soon as they get introduced into the sporting culture, just the way things work over here in the States, and the intensity gets ramped up and the coaching gets ramped up, that's when they're most fragile. So it's really important for me from a coaching standpoint to apply the appropriate level of stressors in the weight room, not only from a physical standpoint, but also from a cultural, psychosocial, emotional standpoint. You know, I need them to be tough.
And that's the great thing about having a platform like Metrifit, because you can't measure it, you can't evaluate it, right?
Yeah, it's spot on. Absolutely. And, you know, that's one of the beautiful things about Metrifit is there just are so many great qualities that we can look at and different ways to reference different data points and make really good objective decisions about those things.
Yeah, and that brings us on to the whole area of training load, the use of session RPE, how you would use that to work out your training load in arbitrary units. Is that something you place quite a lot of emphasis on with your athletes?
Yeah, you know, I think the big thing is we do collect session RPEs for everything, whether it's strength and conditioning related activities, whether it's sports specific related activities, whether it's recovery. You know, all those things have value into the development of the human, and so it's important for us to be able to quantify those things. And again, a lot of times looking at some of the most recent research out there, like higher training loads in nature may be beneficial for the resilience and robustness of student athletes throughout the whole competitive year. So it's important for me to get, you know, those numbers as high as possible, as safely as possible. And, you know, the biggest thing is, like, all of it is managed by my student athletes. I'm not going through and setting up calendars for them, because with 75 different student athletes to deal with in 3 sports and 3 different head coaches, it'd be really challenging to know exactly what they're doing all the time. And then especially within the States, things change at like the drop of a hat. And so our student athletes do an amazing job. They understand that after every training session, they need to go onto their Metrifit app and log their training session, both in time and in intensity. And it really, you know, with my volleyball program, I'm no joke, like 100% compliancy. With the soccer programs, it wavers between 30 to 50%, depending on how much effort we put into it as practitioners. But it's huge to allowing me to make the appropriate adjustments from a programmatic standpoint, how much volume, how much intensity we need from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And then more importantly, it really helps me kind of see like what kind of progressions I should be making from an S&C standpoint. Are they adapting to these things? Are things favorable? Or should I be regressing some of the progressions to keep it a little bit more steady state?
Sure. And tell me, just following on from that point with regard to training loads, which really is for me, especially in contact sports, not to mind collision sports, I mean, where you have a huge amount of intensity, but also volume of contact and hits. I mean, how much emphasis do you place on monitoring the training loads, and what are the dangers do you feel for those who don't monitor and just try to figure it out themselves?
Yeah, you know, I think the biggest danger of not monitoring is you won't know. You'll just find yourself sitting in your office, maybe with a coworker or two, scratching your head trying to figure out what happened, where, you know, having the data behind it to really, you know, quantify what has been going on with your individual athletes, it gives you a wealth of knowledge to be able to make those decisions. And, you know, really depending on where we are within season, especially in season, the way we kind of work here in the States is a lot of the stuff that we do with Metrifit and the training load data is we kind of use that behind the scenes. So, you know, we never really want to step in and modify practices from a practice standpoint. A lot of times everything comes from like a secondary training session or a removal of something that we're doing from an S&C standpoint. So, you know, typically in season we want to preserve as much practice time as possible and practice quality as possible. And we really use the training load data and the RPE data, or sorry, the RTT data to really drive home conversations about interventions we can make from a lifestyle standpoint, or from adding like an extra recovery standpoint or a recovery session in there.
Sure, sure. I mean, one of the greatest gains that I've experienced this year with my own guys and with my own sports science and athletic performance team was using Metrifit just to have a look and review and monitor, particularly the acute chronic workload ratio, you know, your last 7 relative to the last 28, because very often when you have an injury, particularly a soft tissue injury, what we've noticed, and Tim Gavitt's done a lot of great work on this, basically is that it's not what happened in that session or even the previous session or two. Potentially it's what's gone on in the previous 3 weeks, and you've just hit that crucial point in that particular session. And that's what I particularly like about it. It's not just looking at the short-term immediate review of workload, but actually looking and, you know, kind of exploring what's gone on in the previous week, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Absolutely, and you know, that's one of the benefits of having Metrifit and then just having this online database where it collects data for me is, as I sat down and kind of did my periodization for the summer, I knew where they had been during the spring and during the fall, and I knew the highest training loads that they had experienced, and so basically I was able to regress and more or less progress on a week-to-week basis the training loads that I wanted my athletes to be in to optimally prepare them for preseason. So to kind of give some context, you know, one of our higher volumed volleyball girls got up to, you know, roughly 7,500 training units 1 week. And so for me, I know I need to get her prepared to handle that, because guaranteed during the fall season, preseason, she's going to get in excess of that. And so really having the data to know kind of where they've been and how to most appropriately progress them to that point throughout the summer was huge, because, you know, we're sitting here at a Friday and I need another girl to get another 1,500 training units. I can say, hey, over Saturday, Sunday, I need you to get 1 or 2 workouts in. I don't give them too much context behind that. I just tell them we need more. And then there's other points where, you know, some girl may be too high, and I say, hey, you know what, on Monday we're going to come in just to recovery, or, you know, more or less don't make any bad decisions over the weekend. Just kind of stay off your feet. And so it's really helped kind of drive the decision making from a programmatic standpoint and understanding where I need to take my girls or my athletes more or less throughout the summer to prepare them optimally for the demands of preseason.
No, absolutely. It comes back to that same point. If you can't measure it, you can't evaluate it. If you don't have data, you can't make informed decisions, right?
Absolutely. You know, and the nice thing is, and I'm sure you've experienced this too with a lot of other coaches, is a lot of times you're kind of on point. You know, you don't get to the levels that a lot of us are at without having a general idea as far as how training should be progressed. And a lot of times when you retrospectively look back at it, you're like, all right, well, we're right in that right level. We're between, you know, 0.8 and 1.1 and maybe 1.3 on the chronic ratio. But a lot of times if you don't know, you don't know, and you're kind of caught with your pants down, and you're kind of going to have some issues.
Sure. Listen, we'll move on to something we touched on earlier on, which was the whole communication process, the feedback process, something that for me, it's all based around one simple word. Well, for me, it's simple as an educator, and that is education. Tell me how you use communication and feedback tools with your athletes to enhance the use of the product, so that it's not separate, if you like, from the coach or separate from the athlete.
Yeah, you know, I think just like you having an educational background, you over-evaluate and overvalue communication and education. And so we're lucky in the sense that a majority of the student athletes that we get at the university are extremely intelligent individuals, and so they can handle more in-depth conversations about a lot of the decisions that they'll make from a lifestyle standpoint and then also from a training standpoint. And so, you know, there's obviously the coach, the strength coach and the athlete interactions, and using the information that they're providing via Metrifit to have, you know, actionable decisions and conversations about lifestyle decisions. And then also there's definitely, you know, good education that needs to be brought forth to the sport coaches, because a lot of times the sport coaches aren't going to have expert knowledge in the things that we have expert knowledge in. And so there really needs to be a good educational session as far as where this data is coming from to help them better understand how they can make best practices happen within their training sessions. So, you know, communication is huge. Making people part of the conversation, I think, is more important than excluding them. And then on the flip side, you know, compliance is huge. So if they understand the value of the system and how it's going to benefit them mostly from a training standpoint long term, there's great compliancy. Ultimately, the world I live in, where people are basically earning scholarships and getting paid to play, it's as simple as you're going to do this or you're going to have an issue. But that's always the last outcome if compliancy is really bad. Best compliancy happens when kids value it and coaches value it.
Sure, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And tell me, David, with your athletes, do you find that they fully engage with you as a coach with them? Do they come to you and ask for facts, for figures, for data? Is it the type of thing where you are the precursor to that, whereby you engage with them first? How does that process work for you?
Yeah, I think student athletes, the kids I work with, they kind of want it left under the radar. Like if there's an issue, they want to know about it. Until then, they're not going to ask. Different times throughout the year when they can start to see the transfer of what we're doing from a data standpoint to performance, they may come in. But a lot of times, I really want them focused on practice, technical, tactical execution, and the physical performance aspect. Myself, the sports medicine people, will take care of that end. And so we kind of want it left behind the scenes as best as possible. We want to engage them in conversation if need be. But if they don't hear from me for, a week or two, they just need to assume that life is good. I'll come to them if there's issues, or if I see something really positive, I want to go to them and really seek them out. But ultimately, like, they have a lot to worry about. I'm sure you see this with your athletes too. There's just so much going on in their lives. I don't necessarily want to bog them down with extra information unless it's in their best interest.
Sure. One thing, I've learned about athletes over the year, and as someone who's played a lot myself in my younger days, all top athletes are inherently selfish individuals, let's be honest.
Yeah.
They need to be. If they're going to be the best they can be for themselves, for their teams, they have to be able to shut things out, and they have to be able to really soak up those really important points. So what I've often found with it is that when players actually understand the purpose and the rationale behind Metrifit, or any other training tool, by the way, that they really engage in it then, because they know this could be the difference, albeit 1%, 2% in a performance increment, that'll make me a better athlete, a better player. Whereas if it's just shown to be something that we use in the background, well, then they could take or leave it. But once they know it's beneficial to them and potentially a crucial difference in a positive way, they engage in it a lot more.
Absolutely. With some of our programs and some of our athletes, if they miss logging a session, they'll communicate with me. If they miss filling out their mind and body session, they'll connect with me because they find value in it. And, I had this one young lady who missed logging a training session, and she was literally in my office crying because she thought she was going to be in trouble. And I'm like, oh, man, we're missing the point here. I'm causing way more stress by making sure that they find it's important than what actually filling it out would be. But they definitely do value it, and it's part of the education, and it's part of them, really trusting the people around them. I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we're lucky enough to have here, is that the student athletes value the people around them. They trust wholeheartedly that the professionals that are put in front of them are there for their best interest as both individuals, as students, but then also as a team collectively. And, there's just a blind leap of faith at times, but there's definitely the education to get that initially.
Yeah, absolutely. And self-awareness is so important there too. And another method I use as well is to turn the accountability back on the players themselves, whereby, you're stating some generic facts about, one player, two players have X% of days in a month not logged in, and without actually turning the whole squad on them, but just making the group accountable without even giving names. So the words come from them themselves, because they're always listening to the coaches. They're always being instructed by the coaches. And even though it's all for the right reasons, there's nothing, in my opinion, as a coach, more powerful than players coaching each other and players making each other accountable for the greater good of the team.
And, I couldn't say it better myself. You are just spot on with that. In a time and day where we perceive as professionals that we lack leadership and accountability, and a lot of it just falls on us as coaches that we're not doing the best we can to set that up. And so, I can't expect my student athletes to be aware of everything. So that for us, it's our job to make them aware of things that are both positive and things that could be concerns coming forward. And if you have a good structure within your team, a good leadership structure, good group dynamics, a lot of the things that you would traditionally have to do as an SSC coach or as a coach in general from a behavior correction standpoint, the players take care of it because they value very highly the quality of information that they can provide as individuals. There's that internalization of like, hey, we're all going to do this and we're going to do it together because it's in the best interest of us as athletes, and it's going to help us win the most amount of games or competitions.
Yeah. One final point from my end before I let you wrap it up with your own philosophy, your own thoughts on it, is another thing for me that is sacred within the dressing room, you know, within the training fields, within competition with your athletes is trust. And for me, where I find sometimes the greatest benefit of using Metrifit is that if, for example, and I'll just use this as an example, if a player has high stress levels, low mood state, you know, automatically, because I live 2 hours from the team I coach, so I get my report 12 o'clock in the day before I leave at 3:30 to make my way across the country. If I need to make phone calls or send a couple of texts just to check in on guys, I do. But where I get the greatest value is that, particularly in sensitive areas like stress or mood, particularly if it's college related, if it's relationship related, the fact that you have a subtle conversation with a player on the phone via text before you arrive to the training ground, and they know that it's just on a trust basis between you and them, automatically for me, they buy into the process of using, for in this case, Metrifit, so much more because they've seen an outcome of that. Similarly, if their energy levels are low, their muscle readiness is low, their muscle soreness is up, and then you provide a reduced session for them that night because obviously you're considering that they're not physically in a great place. Once again, they say, wow, you know, the coaches are actually listening to what I say. They're using this platform for the right reasons. It's not just a gimmick. They buy into that even more. And I think trust is so, so important in any team sports setting or even individual athlete setting.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, those are some of the brilliant aspects that we get by having this information provided to us is the conversations we can have. You know, I think there's a pretty common saying in the sense when you're dealing with athletes is they don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. And, you know, just be able to have those conversations with the individuals and show that you care about them more than just a number on a roster and points in the game is huge because, you know, at the end of the day, I think we all want to say, yeah, this is a job where employees of X university or X, you know, company, but ultimately it is our life. You know, it's their lives as student athletes or as professionals, and they need to know that somebody's looking after them and has their best interest involved because regardless what level you're at, there's a lot of people that won't have their best interest in mind. They're looking for something for them. And so as a practitioner, especially whether it's S&C or a coach or a sports medicine professional, they need to know that you care about them as a person first and foremost, care about the performance second, and then care about results afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great philosophy to have, and students and athletes buy into that. Kevin, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, listening to you, learning from you. I'd like to wish you and all your staff and athletes at University of Wisconsin all the very best, and hopefully we'll cross paths at some stage in the future.
I hope so. Pleasure's all mine, and I'd love to find my way out where you're at some point here. We got a great professional development budget, so maybe you'll see me in the next few years.
You're always welcome in Cork, my friend. You're always welcome.
Love it. Love it.
Take care. God bless.
Thanks, you too.